We recognize that CVUUS gathers on the land of the Western Abenaki people. We respect their spiritual relationship to the land. They understood from the beginning of their time here that their lives depended on the perpetuation of the plants, animals, birds, and fish that sustained them. The Abenaki were astute observers of the cycles of renewal and were careful to not take more than they needed. We hope to learn from them how we can live together in balance with the earth. Welcome this morning. My name is Ellen Flight, and I am a member of the worship team and will be the worship associate this morning. And while I often hear from people, it's like, oh, you seem like such a natural, I will tell you that at like 2 a.m. I woke up with a worship associate nightmare. I was 10 minutes late and I didn't have my notes and it all was going. So instead I was just like 10 minutes late getting here, which is half an hour before you're supposed to get here, so I was all good. So if you are an active member, friend, and I like to see that there's some sticky name signs there, which means we have some visitors or people who left their name tags at home like I did. So welcome especially to you all. Now would be the time to turn your cell phones off or press the silence button to put them into worship mode. And if you need or would like to try our sound enhancing equipment, Liam and Richard are Liam is there at the back and they would be happy to hook you up with some headphones. If you are visiting, we would love to meet you down below at our fellowship hall during coffee, tea, snack time. And if you sign the visitor book in our foyer, then we can send you our newsletter and other news of what we're doing, a monthly copy of our bulletin. We have several ways for you to connect. In fact, on Friday night, we had a really great second open mic night with people not only from CVUUS, but people who came from an advertisement on Front Porch Forum. It was a lovely evening of song and dance and poetry and humor for some people. So thanks for those who arranged it, those who participated by performing, and all of you who came to participate, or those who brought snacks. The worship team is planning next Sunday's service will be in recognition of March 31st's International Transgender Day of Visibility, and we have a special program that we put together. And what we will count on you all coming, but we'd like you to spread the word in our community for folks who might especially find the service that day a supportive environment for them. So in your various circles, if you could spread the word, that would be great. The Charter House, where we once a month cook dinner for, sent a note to Alan saying, please share it with great enthusiasm. Monday's meal was another great hit. We have several guests with experience in the restaurant field, and they couldn't say enough. Best meatloaf ever. My last little way of connecting, if you'd like to just practice being part of this community, at the end of the service today, if we can move the chairs to the sides, because the blood mobile will be here tomorrow, and it would help Laura a lot if this area didn't have chairs in it. So we'll try to remember to remind you at the end. And now, if you will join me in singing our first hymn and gathering song, Come, Come, Wherever You Are. It's number 188 in the gray hymnal, and the words will also be on the screen there. Our call to worship this morning comes from Don S. Cooley. The diversity of the human species is astounding. The fact that we can gather together for common experience is nothing short of a miracle. Today, let us celebrate some of those differences. Let us celebrate those who worship best through music, for whom the Holy speaks through rhythm and harmony, pitch and meter. Let us celebrate the interpersonal worshiper, who finds the sacred in relationships and in community. Let us celebrate those who worship best through the visual world, for whom the divine speaks through the aesthetics of a space. Let us celebrate the verbal and linguistic worshiper, for whom words and languages, stories and poetry are sacred sources of joy and revelation. Let us celebrate those to whom the divine might be found in logical reasoning, in mathematics, and through critical thinking. Let us celebrate the intrapersonal worshiper, those who experience the holy as they listen to the still, small voice within themselves. Let us celebrate those who worship best through their bodies, those to whom the divine speaks through movement and physical action. Let us celebrate the naturalistic worshiper, for whom the sacred is found in plants and animals, mountains and valleys, deserts and forests, oceans and streams. Today, may we find a way to connect with the ultimate, each according to our own ways of understanding and experiencing the world. May we bring our whole selves to this worship service and celebrate the diversity among us. And if you'll join me in the chalice lighting, Barnaby's going to light the chalice.
Amaya's going to come help.
And the chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism and comes to us from the UU service organization from World War II. So, if you're ready, the screen or on in your program. We kindle this flame, honoring the doorways in our souls, the windows through which we gaze at one another, the balconies where we catch glimpses of sky, the thresholds we stand on this morning, wondering, hoping, fearing, dreaming.
Now I'm going to invite any children who would like to hear the children's time for lights to come up and sit with Amaya or towards the front, because we're going to have a little bit on the screen, and I'm going to sit here so I can see the screen. So as you heard from Ellen, we're trying to learn from the people who lived here before us, the Abenaki Indians. And I wanted to find a story about this particular bird, which is called the hermit thrush. It's the state bird of Vermont. But I couldn't find that story among the Abenaki who lived here. However, if you look to the west from any hill here, you can see mountains. And the people who lived in those mountains and west of those mountains had this story about the hermit thrush. And that's what I want to share with you today. And in their story, one of the main players in the story is the creator of the whole world, but the other players are mostly animals. So long ago, the birds had no song. Only humans sang. They sang to greet the sunrise and the sunset, and maybe other times, but not in this story. So the birds really admired the songs of the human, and they would often stop their flying around to listen to the beautiful voices at sunrise and sunset, and they longed to sing too. One day, as the creator was walking through the forest, the creator noticed that there was a great silence, and he was thinking about when he heard the people singing to the setting sun. They had drums and they chanted, and it sounded like they felt something sacred was going on. The creator noticed that the birds were always listening too, and the creator suddenly felt that the birds were missing something from their voices. They should have a song too, he decided. The next day, he called the birds to a great council. Now, the birds came from everywhere. The sky was so filled with variety of birds that sometimes the sun was blocked out, and then they sat on all the trees and the bushes, and they were all weighed down to the ground. When the Creator calls, you come. So there was so much noise, it took a long time for them to settle down. And finally, the Creator asked the birds if they would like to have the gift of song. Now, that's very interesting because the Creator probably knew the answer, but he still felt it was polite to ask. He asked the birds if they would want to have the gift of song, and they all chirped yes. It might have been the biggest chirp in history, with all of them chirping at the same time. Very well, said the Creator, and then he explained his plan for giving each bird a song. When the sun rose the next day, they were to fly as high up into the sky as their wings would carry them. And each would find their song when they reached as far up as they could get and could go no further. That's sort of like teaching the children that sometimes you have to work really hard to get something that's precious, I think. Anyway, the bird that attained the highest flight would get the most beautiful song, the Creator said. And then he vanished. Before the sun rose the next day, the birds were so full of excitement. They were yelling and pushing each other and everybody getting ready to take off the minute the sun rose. And there was one bird that was a little upset about this, and that was the little thrush. He was a tiny bird, and he said to himself, there's no way I am going to get the highest in this contest. This is rigged. The tiny bird perched next to the eagle, and suddenly the tiny bird had an idea. In all the noise and the tumult, the tiny bird flew onto the eagle's neck and hid in the eagle's feathers. And there was all this noise and cacophony, and the eagle didn't notice, and everybody took off the minute the sun rose. The eagle was actually very busy thinking about how he was going to win. And, you know, if you find in life, if you're thinking about something so hard, you might miss other things. If your brain is focused on one thing and not something else, you might miss out. Well, the eagle missed out on the fact that the thrush had settled into his feathers. And it was chaos when things took off. The birds couldn't sing, but they could talk. You know, they were bumping into each other. They said, get out of my way, and ouch, in chirp language, whatever. Time passed, and gradually the birds got smaller, and the weakest one started to drop out. The first to drop out was the hummingbird. And that's why, to this day, the hummingbird has a song that's barely a song. It just sounds like, wait for me, wait for me. That's it. And the next bird to drop out was the cowbird, with big fat bird, doesn't have much of a song either. Anyway, it continued like this. Finally, the sun set, and there were only a few birds still in contention, still flying. The owl, the hawk, the eagle, the loon. It tended to be the really big birds. And they flew through the night. But by the time they got to the morning, only the eagle was still flying. And the eagle kept flying into the day. And then the eagle said, I've won, and I'm exhausted. And he turned around and started to fly back to the original meeting place. And at that point, the thrush jumped out of the feathers and kept flying higher. And the eagle was just too tired to chase it. So the thrush, who was very fresh, having slept through the night in the eagle's comfortable feathers, went flying high enough up that it found a hole in the sky and went into the land of the spirits. And it was amazing up there. It stayed for a couple days. It came back with the most beautiful song, and it practiced it all the way home. It was very excited, but as it got closer to where the landing place was, it saw all of these birds waiting there. And if you could imagine birds crossing their arms and looking sternly, that's the effect. And it realized that the eagle in particular might be angry. So instead of landing among all the birds and sharing its beautiful song, it dashed off into the woods and hid deep into the woods, which is where you usually find the hermit thrush even today, deep in the woods, as if it was hiding. But sometimes it can't help but sing, and the song is so beautiful that all the other birds still stop and listen to it. And it's there deep in the woods There, yeah, go ahead. Deep in the woods, something very, very beautiful coming out of the trees. And so that's the story of how the hermit thrush got its song and why it's sometimes so hard to hear, because it isn't normally around where people are. Now, there are some people in our congregation who love the hermit thrush too. And when this building was built, Rich Hennessy, who was sitting right here, and Abbott Fenn, who no longer is with us, they were a little bit mischievous. They thought a little bit differently the way the hermit thrush did. And they knew about a man in England who made beautiful wooden things. And on every little wooden thing, like this one, he also just stuck in a little mouse for no reason. So you can see there's a mouse there. And Rich and Abbott started talking about what little thing could we sneak into our new building that would be fun. And they decided on a hermit thrush. And some people know this story and some people don't, but up in the corner of our building, which you can barely see way up there in the corner, there's a little wooden hermit thrush that they had carved by the same man in England who makes these things that always have a mouse. So we have our own hermit thrush, and we can tell our own story about it, and we can tell our own story about it, what it means. And I'm going to be talking a little, there's a picture of what our hermit thrush looks like up there in the corner. So when you go off to your classes today, I'm going to invite you to think about what our hermit thrush story is, and I'm going to talk a little bit to the grown-ups about what it might be. And so may your roots grow deep, your branches spread far, and may you find the world to be a beautiful place. So let's sing the children off to their classes. Continuing to share our offering this week, as we are throughout the month of March, with Homes First, a very new organization, a very small organization here in Middlebury that's working to bring the idea of building tiny homes to Middlebury. And you've heard a presentation from two people who work with the group in previous weeks, so I'm not going to go on and on about it. I'll just say one of the great things about tiny homes is that they're very easy to heat, good for the environment. This building is not easy to heat, especially when the boiler goes off, as it was off this morning and was turned on late. And this is not the norm in here for those of you who are visiting. Normally it's a little warmer, but anybody who's been thinking about, I should have kept my coat with me and it's hanging right out there, don't feel embarrassed about going to get your coat, because it's going to take a while for the space to warm up. Meanwhile, I invite you to be as generous as you can in sharing your offering with Homes First. invite you to stand and sing. You. We're going to be talking today about different ways of seeing the world, and one of the most beautiful songs that reflects that is Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, and Francois is giving us the honor of hearing his version of it.
Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows my sorrows. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah. Now sometimes I'm up, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. But sometimes my soul is a heaven bound. Oh, yes. Oh, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows my sorrows. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah. Now you see me around here, yeah, just a going on about my business. Oh, yes, Lord. But I have my troubles down here below. Oh, yes, Lord. No, no, nobody knows the trouble I see. No, 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 nobody knows. Oh, yes, Lord. No, 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 nobody knows the trouble I see. Oh, yes, Lord. Amen. Thank you very much. That was our first rehearsal.
Careful, Francois, you'll give rehearsal a bad name. So I have quite a number of milestones and passages today, and a reflection of how wonderful the open mic night was there several cards related to make sure we say how wonderful the open mic night was and thank everybody. So by the metric of yellow cards, it was a smash hit, but those of us who were there know it was. And we'll just have to do it again. We'll just have to do it again. Jerry and Bobby Loney, there's not much new to report about the health situation from a week ago. Jerry's illness still isn't diagnosed, but it's not getting worse, but they are recovering from COVID. And so it's not really good to try and visit them, but they welcome cards. Poppy says pictures of funny animals always go over well in their house, and they really are appreciative of everybody caring for them and know that they are in our hearts and we are in theirs. Catherine and Merle Schloff are back from a long trip to the West Coast with COVID, which is why they're not here. Catherine's not here today, but they're getting good care from their daughter Pearl and neighbors, and Catherine expects to be back among us soon. And I guess just to finish the tour of the health circuit here, Lynn Ballman was supposed to be giving a testimonial today and lighting the chalice, but she's had a recurrence of her lung infection, and so she's out for a little while longer. She's recovering, and she just asked me to say, had she been here, it would have been a testimonial to her friendship with Marnie, who first introduced her to the congregation, and she joined many, many years ago. Then she moved away. She came back to Middlebury, but had not reconnected with the congregation until Marnie had her stroke. And Lynn, as an old friend, started being at the center of Marnie's care and was overwhelmed to see all the care Marnie was getting from the congregation as well. Walked into this space one day and said, why did I leave? And rejoined, is now a member of the Caring Network. So this is some of what she was going to share in the future. She may get a chance to do that. That would be great to hear her enthusiasm. Speaking of enthusiasm, Chris Murphy has a new member of the family, a new golden doodle named Seamus. And Seamus won't replace Tony, her long, long companion, but not only is a radical change as a puppy as opposed to an old golden doodle, but the change has gone from Italian names, which have been for all of the pets in the family, to an Irish name. And Seamus means Jim, and all of us will fondly remember Jim Murphy, Chris's husband, who was an important member of the congregation until he died in 2015. Fitting for St. Patrick's Day, to have Seamus. A couple of weeks ago, Don Grohl, age 85, died at the Arches. Very few of you would know him. He came to services here, but is an extremely quiet, reclusive man. The one job he did for the town of Middlebury was fence viewer. It sort of says it all about Don's personality. But he did come to our small group meetings at the residence, and I was able to interact with him there. Only found out about this through his only survivor is his sister-in-law, Betty Crowder, who lives out in California, where Don's brother, who is very close to, had died last year, and that was a big part of Don's downturn. So if we find out more about any services remembering Don, I'll be sure to let them know, but I've conveyed our love and support to Betty, and we're awaiting any direction from her about how we can help her and the rest of the family remember Don. And with that, I have one long one. So those of you who read the paper know the Harringtons have been all over it, particularly in sports activities. So finally, I broke down and wrote Tracy. I said, what can I say? So this came back from Tracy. The Harringtons send their love to CVUUS and look forward to coming to services again when the snow melts. Baxter and Mary have been Nordic skiing competitors and are crowning the season in style. Baxter had a first-place finish at the All-Eastern High School Championships last weekend at Rikert, and Mary qualified to represent New England at the Junior National Cross Country Skiing Championships. She spent the past week at Fairbanks, Alaska, where she placed in the top 10 in all 3 under-16 races, including a podium finish, 3rd place on the last day. And to top that off, their father Jay, as some of you may have noticed, was recognized at Ripton's town meeting for saving a man's life last year using his CPR skills while serving with the volunteer fire department. Tracy said she's fine and misses everyone at church, but she knows that the kids will be leaving the nest soon enough, and every day is precious with them, and so it's onto the slopes as long as there's snow. We have a lot of unspoken joys and concerns and milestones every week, and they don't get to the podium for a variety of reasons, sometimes by choice, sometimes by forgetfulness, but we do leave a time of silence in every service for people to get in touch with what's on their hearts and send it out into the room. So I invite you into that silence now, whether you use it for prayer or meditation. Well, Tim plays through the tune to "Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire." I invite you to stand in body or spirit, or remain seated if you like, and sing our hymn.
Our readings this morning come from a website where I found a list of quotes on autism. The first reading is from Kurt Muzacker in his introduction to Bozo to Bassoon, which is a book that's not yet published. Our Western world likes to compartmentalize, putting everything into simplistic categories. Now they have such terms as neurotypical and neurodivergent, separating the entire human population on the planet into two categories. I would say that neurotypical is a diversity as well. Our second reading comes from Nicole, a 13-year-old nonverbal labeled autistic who typed this independently on her iPad. The labeling undermines us in so many levels, but people don't know they need to be reminded that we too are God's children. People don't mean harm because they too are God's children. Love heals lots of wounds. Love is patient. Love is kind. My motto in life. You are loving. Mom has healed her consciousness to allow me to truly reflect my identity as God's perfect child. Just don't let your senses get you fooled. We are more than our bodies. Find the truth so that you can reflect your real being.
You could say there's an irony, but there's also a message in going from something that's nonverbal, someone who doesn't even speak to the world except through writing, to you sitting and listening to me verbal lies at a little bit of length. But I want to start with a joke from a social media site that's geared to folks who identify as autistic, and it goes like this. How many people with autism does it take to screw in a light bulb? The initial answer was, that depends solely on the size and the location of the light bulb. A single autistic person can change most normal light bulbs, but changing bulbs in a traffic light requires special tools and collaboration. So, what is autism? Genetic, non-genetic, environmental causes, each believed to increase the risk, diagnosed from symptoms that impact learning, communication, and behavior, spoken of like many divergences from what is thought to be normal, as on a spectrum from mild to serious, based primarily on social impact. It's thought to be one of the most common brain-based disabilities, but it's amorphous in many ways. And to really get the joke, you have to know something about a common symptom of autism, a tendency to intensely focus on details. Though I wasn't the intended audience for the light bulb joke, and perhaps have no right to this feeling, I felt a love thyself feeling in the words of that answer, an embrace of the bent to focus on trees rather than forests, or to pick a focus and not be persuaded to follow down some path identified by the public as the easy one, such as, it's just a joke, don't overthink it. I was sucked into following the thread of responses. Now, some of the respondents simply debated whether it was ever acceptable to post jokes about their shared condition, which can be seriously isolating or disabling for some people. Most of them, though, happily kept adding new examples of light bulbs needing special treatment. And I finally came to a halt that when someone confided, I had to laugh because I start my answer to every single question I'm asked, well, it depends. I had to laugh too, because I start most of my answers that way, at least silently. The difference I realized is, as I thought about it, is that I have a freely chosen path of divergence from social norms. It's a path called being devoted to Unitarian Universalism. If there were more of us, if we were more rigid and more organized and more devout, we might be disruptive enough to be as oppressed as people living with autism and other forms of divergence from socially accepted behavior. Autism, unlike a freely chosen path, though, is a mental difference for most people which those who deal with it have not chosen. It impacts tens of millions of people to some degree, and it can be painfully isolating and disabling for those with intense symptoms, and extraordinarily stressful for those who love them and try to stay in relationship with them. Increasingly, this and other forms of brain diversity are calling for our attention if we are serious in our commitment, our social action commitment we adopted very recently to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. Why take this challenge on? I want you to think for a minute about probably the world's most famous diagnosed autistic case, climate activist Greta Thunberg. Her focus on the long-term trends and what is at stake, while business and political leaders talk like they care but do too little, is legendary. She keeps coming back to the point. You aren't doing enough. You aren't taking this seriously. Intuitively, it feels important to our survival that we have many people drawn to exploring in depth what specific things depend on, regardless of who is trying to steer them in another direction. That's just one common symptom of autism, and it could be the kind of thing that saves us. People with different ways of encountering life like autism can be prophetic guides for us when their focus lands on anything that's involved in building beloved community. We need to be very, very careful about defining one way of seeing as normal. Too often we have identified people with a marked orientation towards particulars with a mental condition called autism or obsessive compulsive disorder or other ways of being that we label abnormal. That's not loving, and as I said, it could be dangerous for all of us. It could be dangerous for us as we try to cope with what is tearing the world apart. Instead, people at different locations on this spectrum of autism and the many other spectrums used to describe how people are increasingly called neurodivergent or neurodiverse. Or in the words of some of the advocates for this kind of attention, neurospicy. Now, the latter has become to be kind of a controversial term in the world of autism. Some people say spicy is exotic. I'm not exotic. I'm just normal, and I get uncomfortable when people call me spicy. Other people say, no, spicy's fun. Call me spicy. I don't want to get caught up in that debate. I'm going to go back to the term neurodivergent because one, as our first reading said, I think neurodivergent can be used to mean all of us diverging in different directions. So here's a perspective that I found helpful in a book published in 2015 called Neurotribes by a writer named Steve Silverman. One way to understand neurodiversity is to think in terms of human operating systems instead of diagnostic labels. Just because a computer is not running Windows doesn't mean that it's broken. On the one hand, it's kind of a no-brainer to claim that we perceive and process information differently from each other. Humankind is neurodiverse, thanks to a wide range of genetic, health, and environmental influences that begin to impact us even before we're born. The differentiation starts in the womb. Nevertheless, we grow up to be so firmly located in our own bodies and our minds that we often instinctively act as if neurodiversity is news to us. When we are feeling safe and healthy, we often take for granted until it's proven otherwise that others experience events unfolding around us largely as we do. And when we find out that they don't, it's often very unsettling, enough to make us react warily, in some cases abusively, rather than with empathy or curiosity. And sometimes we even do the wrong thing with the best of intentions. I spoke with a number of our congregants about how I should prepare to speak to you today about neurodiversity. One of our college students spoke about it as being a combination of hellish and beautiful, an experience that has connected them to an amazing community of people, and that those connections are a prize they wouldn't trade for anything in the world. But it's really, really difficult to operate in a world that's not designed for you. I have to question the assumption that the world is designed for any of us, but a lot of us seem to be designed to operate in the world that's there better than some others. So we get her point. Another congregant said a good place to start would be a recent podcast with Christy Forbes, an English writer, consultant, and therapist who grew up with severe autism. So I listened to the podcast, and it was about a common form of stress for all of us, burnout, and how burnout operates differently on people who really are dealing with autism. She said that she used the phrase neurotypical person responds to the person with a sign of burnout with well-intentioned suggestions to spend more time relaxing with friends, stop working so much, do the things that are hobbies for you, enjoy, have some special meals, treat yourself to a break in your routine that's going to give you pleasure. But burnout for those with autism actually is quite different. Autism, people who are dealing with autism actually perceive the world in as much detail as people who don't suffer from autism, but they don't process that information the same way. They process it more slowly. And when people with autism suffer from what we would think of as burnout if we don't have autism, they need to shut down completely. A suggestion to do something else that involves a lot of inputs is something that won't help them at all, and in fact can make things worse. So even with the best of intentions, we can be making the situation worse. And what they might need, Ms. Forbes said, is just a complete rest, and it might be a rest of months or even years. This is particularly hard on parents who are dealing with children suffering with autism, because as a parent, you're overwhelmed with the desire to do something positive for your child, to help lift them out of this. And it's almost impossible to stop yourself from making suggestions that actually can make it harder for the child. And Ms. Forbes said that you just have to realize, unfortunately, retreating into video games, and only video games for a long, long time, may be the only way a child can shut down enough to heal, if this is what they're dealing with. Very counterintuitive if you don't have that situation as your way of thinking. But beyond the unintended harms, and I just want to stop here and say one thing about the unintended harms. I've just talked about the unintended harm about someone who's autistic. Now imagine being black and autistic. Imagine being black and autistic and poor, black and autistic and poor and gay. All the unintended harms that pile up for each of these groups pile up in larger numbers for people who share these qualities. So for those of you who are struggling with what this word intersectionality means, how all the oppressions work together, think about it in this context, how the harms pile up, and you'll understand what people are trying to say when they say oppressions are intersectional. But beyond that, the unintentional things, there's what we do when we label, as the first reading said. When instead of saying the person is divergent, we say they're perverse or sick or sinful or disabling, all terms that have been used to talk to certain people who are different. We end up judging them, and what's worse, people in these groups who hear this often end up internalizing it and judging themselves. And it becomes a situation where that 13-year-old girl, Nicole, is the rare person who could say, no, you've got it wrong. God doesn't make mistakes. God loves us all. And they start thinking of themselves as diminished or disabled in some way that is really, really narrowing of their world. Now, that's complex enough, but these things also pile up with physical things that all of us suffer. One of the most important moments of my seminary training was a woman came into the class. We were talking about social action for different oppressed groups, and she talked for 10 minutes before she told us she was legally blind and couldn't see anybody she was talking to, and she said, welcome to the one group of oppressed people everybody is going to join if they're lucky to live long enough, people who are physically handicapped in one way or another. And these things also tend to pile up with the mental issues. So it can be really, really overwhelming. And I thought part of my duty was to offer you a happier way of thinking about it. So I want to introduce you to someone called Leela Sinha. Leela was the speaker on a webinar for the UU Ministers Association on neurodivergence. And she told us this story. She'd grown up, she described, they described themselves and as actually, I'm going to switch and use their absolute preferred pronouns, sie and zur. Leela describes herself as brown, queer, genderqueer, entrepreneurial community minister with a theology of pleasure and a habit of transformative mischief. There wasn't one word on that list about the things she was going to talk about, the most important aspect of her identity, intensive. So Leela told us this story that she grew up in Stamford and then Westport, Connecticut, in UU congregations, was drawn to the ministry, went through seminary, completed an internship in Ottawa, Canada, one of our most largest, most interesting Canadian congregations, and was ordained in 2007. Then Z served 4 years in parish ministry. Over and over, though, the results were friction, flame out, and departure. The one common thread when things broke down was people telling Leela, you're too much, in the sense of being overwhelmingly demanding of their attention and involvement. Leela found herself out of work, immobilized on the coast of Maine with a terrible back injury, and desperate for clarity about the cluster of behaviors that made Zir an ineffective leader among people Leela loved and really wanted to serve. Leela wanted a less dismissive, less negative name for the problem of you're too much. Gradually, Leela developed a new spectrum to say something about herself. Now, spectrums we're familiar with, introvert, extrovert. You've heard a lot about the autism spectrum, but people are inventing new ones all the time. And Leela's new spectrum ran from thinking, a way of thinking that, and feeling emotions, called intensive, to expansive. At the intensive end, where Leela located herself, folks presented as too much to deal with because they were often excited, subject to huge moods, prone to be sprinters, go like hell and rest like the dead was Leela's words to describe. They tended to be ruled by intuition. They were extremely risk tolerant, out-of-the-box thinkers, wrapped up in constant internal conversations with themselves, and it added up to a tendency to be disruptive and comfortable with themselves in disrupted situations. It felt like chaos to people at the other end of the spectrum. At the other end, the laid-back end, as Leela perceived it, expansive tend to be calm, even-tempered, happy to work a little, then rest a little, driven by data and duty rather than gut feelings, risk-averse, conventional, consistent, and dependable, and to folks like Leela, boring. Now, Leela had a lot of thoughts about what this spectrum meant in congregational life. You need both types, those who are strongly one and the other type. You need those to be rare, though. Even those who are strongly at one end of the spectrum or the other learn lots of strategies for adopting behaviors on either side of the middle when it's helpful or necessary. What's hidden is how demanding this is of the people who are at the extremes, how hard it is on them, the way it's hard for that person with autism to deal with burnout. So when the time came for questions, I asked, well, aren't some activities just more demanding of being in one place or another? What about parenting? And Leela conceded that being a reliable and effective parent is often very hard for intensives. It forces them to work with skills and strategies that don't come naturally for them because kids need reliable, consistent parents. On the other hand, Leela said, an intensive might be an ideal interim minister for a congregation that needed to change or die. So Leela also said, if you're rolling something important out to a congregation, say our involvement with our new social action covenant, expansive folks thrive with drip feeding of the important elements and possibilities. While those who lean intensive aren't going to pay any attention at all to you until something about it really excites them, and then they may have very strong preferences about what to do. I found such insights very helpful, and there were a bunch of others, which I may share at some point, but the main reason I wanted to talk about Leela is just to raise the idea that you might be buying into spectrums that aren't a good description of your universe, and that can be short-sighted. It's liberating to recognize that you can create your own spectrums, or to use the word that Leela actually said was better, frameworks, and that will help you figure out who you are. Leela went far enough with her spectrum to write a book called You Are Not Too Much, elaborating for people like Zer, and indeed for everyone who's ever felt marginalized in some way because they experience the world differently, how you might cope with it. And it made me think, I wish we could all figure out how to write our own books that told all the stories that align with what is most positive in us. Wouldn't that be a good book to have on our shelf, at least in our mind? In the past few weeks, I've also come to encounter Leela as a new way of thinking about our accountability promise in our social action covenant. Start with being accountable to yourself for figuring out how you fit into the world and how to do what you want to do to build a beloved community. But then you have to continue on and talk to those who actually have that experience. Speaking of forging this new identity of intensive, Leela said, for me, this is by us, for us, nothing without us stuff. In other words, here's how to see me and treat me if you are committed to including me in beloved community. Now, some of you may recognize in that remark that nothing about us without us, words that you've heard elsewhere. That became the widely used slogan for the entire disabilities rights movement in the 1990s. No one seems to know where it came from. It was imported from the disability rights movement of South Africa, but they think they got it from somewhere in Eastern Europe. No one remembers where. Regardless of how it arrived here for our journey to spiritual wholeness, I hope we make nothing about us without us an accountability bird watching over us like our beautiful hermit thrush. And it will be easier if we see the world as neurodivergent, because that's a word that can encompass all of us. Nothing about us without us, if we start with an us concept, seems like a step we can take. So I'm going to leave you with these words from Reverend Leela. We don't know who is in the room if it's not set up to allow people who are different to emerge. We don't know who is in the room if it's not set up to allow people who are different to emerge. So I'd say to you, a symptom of beloved community will be spaces like this one, if we are intentional about building and maintaining them as sanctuaries, fellowship halls, and classrooms for such emergence. May it be so. Our closing song really puts a bow on this. How could anyone ever tell you? The words will be up there. It's in the teal hymnal, but it's a very simple tune. I think you can pick it up and sing without the hymnal. As you go forth, remember that this is not a journey we'll ever complete, but go forth with the joy of knowing there's so much room to get better and so many rewarding experiences waiting for us as we do that. Now we start by taking care of others by moving the chairs to the side for the blood drive folks. And downstairs today, I hope you can come to the social hour because we have a birthday cake for all the March birthdays. So some of you who are visitors who have March birthdays, it was especially important that you came today. And it's an unusual cake. It's called Pigs in Mud. And the mud, of course, is chocolate. But you'll see it when you get there. And I hope you all enjoy. Bye.